malicious apps removed from the Google Play Store. What you need to know.
Ken, it looks like you've got a story here about some fraud on Android using wireless application protocol services. What can you tell us?
Yeah. So what we have is a few security researchers from Zscaler were taking a look at the different apps in the Google Play Store and noticed that there were 17 Android apps that were infected with this what they call Joker malware. Google refers to it as bread. It's been a big problem that they've been combating for the last 3-ish years. And essentially what these apps are they're dropper apps. And what happens is they'll find the actual code for a legitimate app and essentially copy it, but they'll also add in little bits for requesting specific permissions from the Android device, like potentially access to your contacts list, different device information, and they'll use that to potentially sign you up for, in this case, it was WAP or Wireless Application Protocol services. So what they were doing was the apps specifically targeted here were all apps that were feigning or trying to look like private messaging apps or scanning documents or PDF converter type items. And they had gotten, I think it said, a couple of 100,000 downloads before Google eventually picked up on it and removed them. So they did find them and remove them. And you might sit there and say, well, how do they avoid the Google security scans? And it's because of their being a dropper. When it'll run normally, normally as in how a regular app would function initially. And so it'll seem like you have a perfectly legitimate app, and then after some amount of time, it will trigger to go have this extra bit of dropper malware dropped on your device. And at that point, you'll get infected with the malware.
So if this requires you to have install, what's the setting? Install software from third-party app stores or whatever? Because I know there's a setting for that.
In this case, these apps were actually on the Google Play Store. I know that within the article, it was also talking about the fact that if you go to third-party app stores, this Joker or bread malware is even more widespread in those places because it doesn't have the same level of, I don't necessarily want to say security, but Google is, I guess, going a little step or two further than the other third-party app stores are in terms of protecting what's in the app environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I know that when I tried to install software directly on a phone before, even if it's from not even from a third-party like app store, like it's some sort of experimental thing where I would actually have to turn off that setting and then run the APK directly, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And I know that Imperium actually did a similar story recently too. That I think they had like a 40 some odd like from back earlier on this year that they picked up off of Joker, and I know that when I've looked at this before with the malware, it's kind of tricky because like you said, Ken, it loads clean. It maybe asks for a few extra weird permissions, but it loads clean and doesn't do anything wrong for whatever set amount of time. And that's how it kind of sneaks by all the checks because you don't know it's doing this thing because it has a timer or some other trigger that actually begins and initiates that malicious activity. So if you're doing a normal scan like Google does on Play Protect or on the things that they do on their Play Store, they don't necessarily see it because it doesn't do it immediately. It's not there at the start.
Right. I think Google had said that in addition to these 17 apps, and I think this stat might be from earlier in the year, since 2017, they've removed almost 1,700 apps that had this type of malware. So it keeps coming back. I guess someone's really persistent or some group, but also it's I guess it's lucrative to whoever the fraudsters are to keep coming back and doing that.
And you think about what they're doing too, like you said, the premium services you're getting signed up for, you don't really realize you are. So all of a sudden you see these bills that come in, so you either have to fight them, or sometimes people don't recognize them because you think of all the other bills you have for different services you may already enjoy, like some of the over-the-top services, and all of a sudden you that onesie, $2 dollar amounts, or even the $50 amount, once a quarter may just sneak by you before you realize you're being charged.
Yeah, especially if you're not necessarily looking at every transaction. If you're just looking at, okay, that dollar total seems about right, that seems about right, it can slip by you.
What do you recommend people do in this situation?
Well, from what it seemed like, it seemed like a lot of people were looking for the legitimate app and unfortunately stumbled upon the malicious app. So the one thing to do initially, at least to me, is just making sure you're vetting what am I installing on my device, who's the publisher, seeing, oh, this app, I'm expecting it to be from publisher XYZ, but it's from ABC. Mm-hmm. Do I have the right one? Do I go back to the list and see, did I miss one? Just verifying that. And then also, when you install your apps and they're asking you for permissions, make sure you're taking a look at what permissions you're giving these apps access to, especially when it comes to things like the contacts list, potentially location, or anything financial for signing up for services.
The other one I always tell people too is especially, but you got to be careful, is look at the reviews. See how this has been reviewed. See if anybody else has said, hey, this is a scam or this is a bad app. So of course, people pad those reviews with with false ones too. But sometimes it can trigger. It's like looking at your review of products on some of the online services. I always look at the worst reviews first. That's where I always start. Is what's the worst review somebody gave this, and then maybe work up the chain to see if it's worth installing or using.